about 4 years ago. I wasn't at work because I was living in hospitals and bedridden. In the end, I ended up having 10 operations. And
over the course of
9 years.
I'm here with Bernie Lowe, a star veteran journalist from the likes of CNBC and Bloomberg. Today we're going to talk about him, his life journey, and also the things that he's had to overcome. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's been a while since we've done this, huh? 12 years ago, time just went by just like that, didn't it, huh?
It did. Let's jump into it. When was and how was the transition to CNBC, like getting your own show, and how did you accomplish that?
Well, they actually came looking for me because they were scouting for talent that was in Asia already doing English television programming. And there wasn't much at the time. Satellite TV was very underdeveloped, so, they had scouts going around Asia looking for talent within primarily local stations because television was dominated by free-to-air terrestrial television at that time. And they noticed that every night I did the financial report on TVB Pearl, and they contacted me and asked me to come in and said, you're one of the few, who has a command of the language, having done an MBA curriculum, knowing something about the business lingo, knowing something about a little bit about financial analysis and all the aspects of business. And I was a one-man band at TVB. I was the reporter, I was the producer, I was the editor, I was the anchor. I just had to find some way to put an 8-minute to 10-minute financial report together every night, and somehow I just did it. Some days were better than others, but yeah, somehow I did it. So they came calling. It was chaos at first because there weren't many TV people, so they had to bring in a lot of print journalists. So there were newspaper journalists, magazine journalists, and everybody kind of had to learn TV, business TV from scratch, save for a few of us, who were actually already working in the medium. So that took a little bit of doing. There was a lot of trial and error in the process.
I was at CNN, and I was a producer there, and I did a lot of the other roles, so I certainly can empathize.
Yeah.
What was it for you when you got on camera? What was the feeling like, or was there a discovery, or? It
was basically, I treated it as storytelling. Just to back up just slightly, the few years that I worked in local television, I didn't start off as an anchor. Nobody starts off as an anchor. Well, some people do. When they do, it tends to be a mistake because you miss out on a lot of the things that make anchors good anchors, and that is telling a good story, news gathering, learning how to report, that sort of thing. So when my first years, in local television at ATV and TVB, we're doing things like covering the demolition and closure of the Kowloon walled city, for instance. I learned from the basics, everything from the boring, the health authority press conferences to the government press conferences, news gathering, doing the overnight shift, covering 5-alarm fires, major accidents, mass casualty events, all that sort of thing. And all those experiences really come together. And by the time I was firmly in the anchor chair, I was really thankful that I had all that experience in the storytelling, because it makes you a better storyteller and a better communicator as an anchor, as opposed to a script reader or a news reader, not necessarily even understanding what you're reading, the words that are in front of you on an auto cue or a teleprompter. I
really want to hear about how you got started. Did you always want to be a journalist? Or?
No, that's the strange thing. That's the irony of it, is I got into television news completely by accident. I grew up in a family with 3 boys and 2 parents who are academics. It's great having smart parents, but it also makes things difficult because they encourage you to learn and learn lots of things. And I couldn't focus, so I went to school, got 1 degree, and I still couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Yeah, I got 3 degrees, liberal arts, but then when I got to into my master's program, I finally sort of put things together because I was a violinist also growing up,
Really?
Chinese tiger moms, wanting their kids to be good at everything, academics, music. I was a very competent violinist, a professional violinist at one point during my college years. So what I did was I put an MBA curriculum together with arts performance and sort of did a hybrid degree, which basically prepared me to manage a symphony orchestra, understand the needs of artists. And after grad school, I had never been to Hong Kong before. I lived, for 25 years in North America.
Did you have family here, or?
My parents were from here originally, but emigrated in the 60s. After grad school, I was contacted. I had an aunt here who told me that the Hong Kong Philharmonic was looking for a performing arts manager. And back then there was no email or anything, and we communicated by snail mail, by post for about a couple months. And they invited me back for an interview and flew me back and had the interview. And there was something lost in translation because for some reason they assumed with a Chinese name that I was brought up here and went to school overseas and spoke and wrote Chinese perfectly, which is absolutely not the case. I'm very fluent in Cantonese now, having been here over 3 decades, but the writing and reading don't exist. So that didn't work. So I just spent a few weeks here, seeing the relatives. And before I left, by chance, I ended up having lunch with Selina Chow, who used to be a legislator many, many years ago in Hong Kong in the Legislative Council. And she, at the time, was the chairman of ATV, Asia Television.
Oh, yeah, I remember ATV.
Yeah, and she asked me to visit, and I visited. And one thing led to another. I met the news director of English News, and he said, "You want to work here?" Because, I've got half my positions are empty here. I can't find enough native English speakers who want to work at these wages that we paid. And I said, why not? It would be a great way to learn about Hong Kong and see Hong Kong. Next thing I knew, next week, I started as a cub reporter and never looked back. One thing led to another. Worked at ATV for a while, went to TVB for a while, and then when cable and satellites, pay TV, started up, CNBC started expansion internationally in 1994. I was one of the few people that was doing, a business report in English, and I was part of the startup team to CNBC. So that's basically how I got started, completely by accident.
One of the great things about Hong Kong, if you're capable and willing, it's a place where you can really find any profession. Was there ever a point in time as you were kind of building up your skill set that you were like, I want to give up, or should I continue on? Was there any kind of inflection point like that for you?
Yeah, there wasn't, because things just fell into place for me. But once I got into CNBC, one thing led to the other. But very quickly, I was thrown into the anchor chair. I was doing a 1-hour show. Before I knew it, I was one of the co-anchors on their flagship show called Squawk Box, which persists till this day. It's still the flagship show. As time went on, I wanted to do more than, talk about the markets and business and, economics and GDP reports. And then my bosses, decided to let me kind of spread my wings a little bit. And we started adding different talk shows, where I could go beyond the confines of business and talk more about maybe what drives people's success, not just about their report cards and their earnings, but, about their personalities and, what really got them to start, found, and build their legacies in business.
For people who don't know, this was the show, but tell me about a couple of your favorite interviews.
Some of the interviews that I did in the early days, I had no idea how big these people would become. I remember interviewing Bill Gates in, I think it was 1992. That was during the days of MS-DOS. Remember the CRT monitors with the green cursor, way before Windows 1.0. And at that time he had a vision, but I wasn't sure where he was going with it. Where was personal computing going? And he was trying to give me his vision and tell me what we were going to be doing 5 years from then, 10 years from then, what 20 years later would look like. And at that time, he was very young. He still had that nerdy sort of, I just dropped out of college to work in a garage and build computers. Kind of look to him. But looking back at that time, he had a spark in his eye and he really had a vision, made him into, obviously, who he is today. A lot of the memorable interviews were interviews outside business. Martin Yan, do you recognize that name? He was a chef.
Yan Can Cook, you mean?
Cantonese accent, teaching expat Chinese dishes and that sort of thing. We had a lot of fun cooking together. That particular show kind of set me off on a tangent where I started to really enjoy successful cooks.
He was the guy as well, too. I mean, he
Yeah,
had his own
exactly.
show, and he was one of the only ones.
Exactly. Obviously, he's a chef first and foremost, but it's a huge business behind it, you know.
Yeah.
And over the years, I ended up doing people like Pierre Gagné, who was a very famous French chef. Gordon Ramsay was on my program.
Oh, yeah.
You know, yeah.
When was he on your program?
About 2015, 2015, 2016.
But I want to go dive a little deeper into your past. You know, what shaped you?
My father, he's a doctor of pharmacy, so he was involved in a lot of research, you know, in new compounds, new drug development, that sort of thing. And I was born in Canada because he was on the faculty at University of British Columbia. And my mother was a virologist who was working in the virology lab at UBC. In a way, I'm kind of the black sheep of the family because my two younger brothers both did what good Chinese sons do and went into, you know, into the science. One is an oral surgeon and the other mechanical and transport engineer. So, you know, 4 out of 5 in our immediate family are in the sciences. And I'm the one, you know, who went to liberal arts school, played a lot of music. Per chance, I accidentally fell into media, and it did work out. A little bit unusual. When we get together, you know, we still kind of joke about it, you know. Here I am, the eldest of 3 sons, but, you know, I was a bit wayward. Mom said I was the first and she wasn't quite sure what to do with me. But by the time she figured out the mistake, you know, she got it right with my 2 younger brothers. The intention was never for us to become, you know, soloists, you know, or seek careers in music, because, you know, far more people end up, you know, busking on street corners than they do playing in the New York Philharmonic or, you know, or the Chicago Symphony or something like that. But I think it was more wanting to instill a sense of well-roundedness and culture, you know, and not being one-dimensional, but being multi-dimensional, you know, being able to appreciate different things in life, not just, you know, go after a career, not just making money to save up money to take out a mortgage to buy a house and then buy 1 car, then 2 cars and that sort of thing, but have a wider perspective, wider appreciation for life. So I think that's why Mom and Dad, more Mom, you know, on the music side, you really kind of pushed us in that direction. You know, it's lucky she did, because I wouldn't have come to Hong Kong, you know, if I wasn't a violinist.
When you decided that you wanted to become a journalist and you're starting as a cub reporter, how did you break the news to your parents? What did they think? Like, what was that like? What was that moment like?
They weren't taken aback or surprised in any way, because they knew that coming to Hong Kong was, you know, after growing up in my first 13 years in Corvallis, Oregon, I mean, they were at UBC at the time, but very quickly my father took a teaching position at Oregon State University, which is in this tiny town in rural Oregon called Corvallis, Oregon. Back then the population was 9,000 people. For me to coming back to Hong Kong, to kind of, you know, meeting my relatives here and kind of seeing where my parents grew up, it was a journey of discovery in so many ways for me. And I did a lot during those years as I was kind of fumbling around that summer. There was a period of time where I was a substitute English teacher at St. Paul's all-girls schools, where actually I met my now wife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I knew her then. We weren't dating or anything, you know, when she was in high school, but we didn't date until she was at University of Hong Kong. But I did all kinds of other things too. That was the first year where they introduced the pilot localization scheme, because they knew that 1997 was coming. I'm talking about Cathay here. They knew that they had to find a source of local pilots that could be trained, you know, to keep the airline running in the future, because up until then they'd been depending on former British military pilots or Royal Australian Air Force pilots. That was the first intake batch. Those people based on aptitude tests, psychological battery tests, and believe it or not, video games to show dexterity. And, you know, every couple weeks I'd go back and they'd call me back and do another test and do another test. Next thing I knew, I was on my way to Australia. So they had whittled down hundreds of initial applicants down to less than a dozen. And I didn't make it in the end, you know, because they only chose a handful to start.
But got very far.
Yeah, I did get
Yeah.
very far, but it was a great experience. There was a point where I thought, because I saw what the starting salaries were like, the Hong Kong police invited me to interview to become an inspector. Really? Yeah. When my parents heard that, they said, "No, wait, whoa, no, you don't know anything about triads. You don't speak the English, you don't read the language well enough. You won't survive as a police officer in Hong Kong." So when they found out, that my grand aunt Selina Chow, had met me and invited me to visit her television station, I think they were relieved more than anything, that maybe I would, become a TV, reporter. That was quite a summer I spent here. My first
just
summer
the
in
summer,
Hong Kong.
right? Wow. Yeah, you really could have been anything. You're very close to being a pilot, professional
Yeah.
musician, but ultimately, look how far you've come with the journalism.
Yeah.
And your parents seeing you on TV must have been super proud. Like,
Yeah.
my son's on TV. You're the oldest.
I am the
As
the
well,
eldest
which
of
is,
three sons. Mhm.
Must have been some expectation.
Yeah. I think it had a lot to do with my education too, because I did my bachelor's degree in at the time it was a fairly new school, but it was an experimental state college in Olympia, Washington, called the Evergreen State College. You ever heard of Reed College before in Portland, Oregon? It's where Steve Jobs went to school. It's a school where it's not run the traditional way. You don't take tests, you don't have finals, you don't have exam periods and get grades. They actually grade you on with oral essays. So you do oral examinations and then they write you up, They basically issue essay form reports on your performance, and you don't actually have the grade point averages. It's a school which emphasized communication, the Socratic dialogue method of education, which forced everybody, no matter how introverted, you had to learn how to debate, you had to learn how to defend. I have to say that, the 4 years I spent at the Evergreen State College had an awful lot to do with, my ability to communicate and the ultimate success, which I was fortunate to find in media. I think it really helped me get prepared and gain the confidence, to be able to talk and think on my feet and speak extemporaneously like I had to do to get to where I did.
And then you were on the training grounds and you didn't even know it. Well, I want to talk to you now about, I know that you had this really terrible, devastating, this ailment that you were hit with, and I know it's taken you a great amount of time and will to recover, but I wanted to hear from you, what happened, because you've had this amazing, illustrious career up until, let's say, 2019, and then I think the world didn't hear from you.
I was involved in a car wreck when I was quite young, about 8 years old or 9 years old or so, and I healed up okay, but my spine at that time, did develop some weakness, and as I grew up, as the years went by, it didn't develop quite like a normal person who didn't suffer, who didn't experience that kind of trauma, and there were some weak spots. In 2015, I suddenly experienced severe sciatica, where the sciatic nerve was completely impinged by a bone spur, an osteophyte, and I had one operation to remove the bone off the nerve, but there were some surgical errors that occurred. There was some slippage and there was too much bone removal, which caused instability in the spine, which required further surgery. It required a fusion, so they basically had to put some hardware in and fixate and immobilize a couple segments of spine, which helped at first a little bit. One of the things they say about spine surgery is once you start spine surgery, it never really goes away. You keep on having new problems cropping up, like, when you take two independent vertebrae and you fix them together with screws and rods, that puts more unnatural pressure, stress on that level, and the other levels have to work harder. And that's exactly what happened to me. I had to have more fusion upwards. I had some artificial discs put in, to see if that might solve the problem. I was still on staff at CNBC, but I was on extended medical leave, employed by CNBC until about 4 years ago. I wasn't at work because I was living in hospitals and bedridden. In the end, I ended up having 10 operations. And
over the course of
9 years. It's a different culture here, there's a different skill set And there's a different need, the population, versus America, which has 40 million people, the incidence of severe spine deformities and disease, obviously there are going to be far fewer cases here in Hong Kong. So after, many years of seeking both private and public help and not getting anywhere, not getting any better, finally I ended up at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. And the team there was able to reconstruct my spine. They had to pull everything out that was done the previous 9 times in Hong Kong, completely rebuild my spine. They had to break it in a couple of places to straighten it out and realign it. And that recovery took a long time. It took over 2 years of physical therapy. I couldn't work. I was still in a lot of pain, a lot of medication. And it was only about half a year ago. It was only just before Christmas last year that they finally found that my spine had finally fused, that it was cured for now. It was stable and I was able to function, and I am mostly out of pain. 9 levels of spine are now immobilized. There are a lot of things I can't do that I used to take for granted. I can't clip my own toenails. I'm glad the missus doesn't have a problem with that. But putting socks on, it's like doing yoga. It's sitting on the carpet on the floor sideways and slipping them on and trying to pull them up and things like that because I'm so stiff in some areas. But the fact that I'm able to sit here with you, fairly normally, having a conversation with a good old friend like this, it says a lot. I really have come a long way. It was tough. It was really, really, really tough. All those years I spent in bed, all the years I spent housebound. Inevitably, things happen. Your social life goes away. Your friends kind of disappear. They don't mean to abandon you. They don't mean it out of malice or anything, but they don't see you because you're not at drinks on Friday, or you're not out on weekends, or that sort of thing. Mentally, psychologically, socially, the isolation was very difficult, really, really hard to get through.
So essentially, though, you were in search of how to repair, or for the lack of a better word, just come back to normal for your spine. And so there must have been a point in time where you didn't know if you could come out of this even too.
Yeah,
right?
I was in so much pain. I had maxed out on morphine, maxed out on oxycodone and OxyContin, which are the same thing, but one's long-acting, one's short-acting. They even had me on fentanyl at one point, and the pain was just excruciating. I contacted an organization in Switzerland called Pegasus Swiss Association. As you may know, in parts of Europe, like Switzerland and Belgium and the Netherlands, they're much more liberal and much more progressive about medically assisted deaths, essentially euthanasia for humans, for incurable, intractable medical conditions, pain that cannot be controlled. And the debate goes on all over the world, and different countries have different stances and positions. There was a time you had to be certified terminally ill to be able to seek that kind of help. But nowadays, if you're in chronic pain and there's no way out, there are organizations that help, and I did seek their help. But fortunately, I was able to get help that brought me back from the brink and allowed me to start to participate in life again. I'm thankful that they were there and that they were so compassionate and willing to step in and help if that time came. If I needed to do that, if I couldn't take it anymore, if I couldn't bear another day. At a certain point, there were no more drugs, there were no more medications that I could take. Yeah, but I'm glad I didn't have to. I still have their number, but they know my situation now, that I eventually did find help.
What was it for you that brought you back from the brink of despair?
It was my wife and I spending a year researching who were the best people in the world for conditions like mine. And we had many Zoom calls with Europe, Luxembourg, and Germany, talked to doctors in Australia. The Germans are quite good. They have a lot of research and they've created a lot of the hardware and technology. When it came down to it, it wasn't just where I was going to get fixed, but the long recovery period afterward. So the decision came down to where was my family, where was my infrastructure, and that was going to be the U.S., which is why we ultimately chose California and went to LA, because my family is in Seattle. That was a victory in itself, yeah. That surgery was in 2002, and it took, a little over 2 years, 2.5 years to actually fully heal.
So part of the search was to find a cure, and part of the search was to find a way out if there was no cure.
Yeah. A lot of the time I felt I was on my own, and my poor wife, who was using all her annual leave, every holiday she had, she was spending with me, going and seeing doctors and getting tests for years, trying to find a solution. It was a fight, it was a battle that we were in together, because I didn't have much of a social circle left anymore at that time. So without her, I couldn't have done it. She saw me through it, really. I owe her an awful lot, and I can never repay her for everything she's done for me.
Was there a point where you gave up yourself because you felt bad?
There was a point where I begged her. There was a point where I begged her to go with me to Switzerland. She would buy a two-way ticket, round trip ticket, and I would buy a one-way ticket. She's the one who told me, she always instilled in my mind, Bernie, it's always there. It's there if we need it. If that's the only choice, I'm not going to let you die in pain. I'm not going to let you live in excruciating pain, lying in bed for the next 5, 10, 15, whatever years. If it gets to that point and there's nothing that can be done, that's there. We know it's there. They've approved our case. But let's give it a try. Let's give it a try. Let's see what we can do. We haven't exhausted all our options yet. So let's do that, okay? Let's try and get you better. Let's find a way to do it. You have to do your PT, you have to work at it. You can't wait for a magic bullet, or a silver bullet and somebody to fix you. You have to be active, take a proactive part in recovering. Very mature way of looking at it.
I mean, the things that go through my mind is if you're laying there and you can't move and you can't live, then what is time like for you?
You know what the hardest part was, actually? It wasn't me and my pain, because I knew that if the time came, I had a way out. I was afflicted with this in my 50s, and my parents are 87. I'm supposed to be taking care of them instead of my mother and father making calls, in Seattle around to the hospitals and the orthopedic centers. That's the part that made me feel, aside from what, the burden that I created for my wife, is that I wasn't there like I should have been for my parents. I should be there, 3-4 times a year for a month at a time at least, helping them with things, taking care of things. They're still living independently, spending time with them, just being with them, which I got the opportunity to do in 2022 after the big reconstruction surgery in Los Angeles. I spent several months, about 4 months in Seattle with them, and that was very, very enriching. So I'm lying there, in pain, unable to do much. Time is moving so slowly, and I'm filled with guilt, because of what my problems are causing for other people, and I don't know what to do about it. And the guilt just has stuck with me to this day, and I hope I find a way to reconcile all of that, and I hope I find a way to make my peace with it.
I mean, it's a miracle that you're here.
It is in many ways. The easy way would have been to take the easy way out, wouldn't it?
Which many people think about and consider, and some do take that route. What do you think that means for you? Like, what is Bernie's 2.0? Why do you think that you were saved in a way?
Well, I still think I have time. I still have good years left ahead of me. I mean, it took away my prime career years. Hopefully, I can take my experience and help others who are going through similar things, whether it's a terminal disease or not. People often think, only those with terminal disease should even be considered as subjects for voluntary assisted death or medically assisted suicide. But, suffering comes in all kinds of forms. You don't have to be terminally ill to be suffering and not curable. So hopefully I can use, what I've gone through in my life in the last decade or so as an advocate for those people. And, now that I'm back doing commercial events, acting as an MC, host, and making speeches. Hopefully I can aim a lot of my attention and effort and energy in that direction. I'd like to use my remaining years to do that. All those years I spent alone, cooped up, isolated like that, you know that there are a lot of other people going through the same thing that don't have a chance, that don't have a forum, that don't have an opportunity and a friend like you to tell their story. I hope to do something. I hope to do something with what I went through, because I can empathize completely. I've been there. I don't know exactly what form it's going to take, but maybe a podcast, maybe on YouTube, it may be hitting the speech circuit, it may be working with groups, I don't know. Maybe a combination, probably a combination of all of the above.
I mean, I think this age could just be the beginning, right? Does it have to be so much of a twilight as more like just another version?
My grandfather, he was a doctor, trained at Lingnan University in Guangzhou, when he went to Canada, did a residency and earned a Doctor of Public Health at the University of Toronto, and became a very well-known physician in Vancouver during the time when a lot of Hong Kong immigrants were making their way over to Canada, and he helped them as a friend, not just as their doctor, but help them settle, help them assimilate into their new country, into their new home as well. And he never retired. He worked until he passed away at the age of 87? Yeah, he was still working. It's the idea is to never have to retire, to completely wipe it, I think, from your vocabulary. Live life. Life isn't about numbers, is it? It's not about 60 or 62 or 65 or whatever.
Well, I love how you're going full force on it. It really hasn't been that long since you've been back. It's just been all courage. Like, hey guys, I'm back, which I love. I mean, I love seeing that. And there's no hesitation to be like, hey, look, I've been out and it's been tough, and you'll try wherever you can utilize your vast experience and wisdom. I think that's one of the things that I'm enjoying seeing, is watching this news story unfold. I think you taking that step to interview me was a big deal. It made a big difference in my life, and I wanted to thank you.
Well, you were the right, that film, that was the right film at the right time. It was the subject matter. When my producers proposed it to me, it grabbed me just like that. I said, I've got to do this. I've got to do this guy. You got to put him on air. You got to talk about this. It's right up our alley, So pleasure was all mine.
I have a bunch of questions to ask you that you can answer quickly, so that our viewers can learn a little bit more about you in a different way. So, if you were a superhero, what would be your superpower and why?
I guess I'd be Spider-Man.
Okay.
I'd be Spider-Man because I could get to places really, really quickly, and I could foil the criminals without being too violent. Yeah, I've always had the secret desire to be a bird, to be able to fly above and all the problems, on the ground and everything like that. So I guess Spider-Man might be the closest.
If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Warren Buffett.
Okay.
I would want to know whether what he did all those years to become successful.
If you could solve one global issue, what would it be, and how would you approach it?
Cancer. Definitely cancer.
How do you define success?
Having made the world a better place in your own way, and having brought as much happiness to as many people as you possibly can.
What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
My pets.
Oh.
Yeah, I've been a lifelong animal welfare advocate. Ever since I was 14, I've raised, rescue cats and dogs, mostly cats. Large part of my decades in Hong Kong, I've worked with many organizations, SPCA, Hong Kong Dog Rescue, Lifelong Animal Protection, LAP, Society for Abandoned Animals, and many others. And if there's one thing I preach to people, it is that please always adopt a pet. Do not buy a pet. Don't encourage the breeding industry. This world has far too many unwanted, abandoned animals, including pedigrees, in shelters, and they're all filled. They're all filled in overcapacity. Please do not encourage breeding of animals when there are so many that need homes.
One more question for the younger generation. What advice would you like to give, or could you give?
Find a purpose. and hopefully choosing a path in life that will lead you to leaving the world a better place than it was when you came in, I think, will really bring you a lot of satisfaction and happiness in life. Not just chasing money or trying to make as much as you can or have as many toys as you can, but finding that focus within a reasonable amount of time.
Is there one thing that you would want to say to a family member that maybe you feel like you haven't said?
Fortunately, my family is very, very close and very, very communicative. There aren't many things that we don't say to each other. But if I had a message to my family, I've always been a difficult child. I was the first son. I had problems, deciding on the course of my life. I had problems making decisions. And my health, I suffered a lot of health problems. From my late teens until now, there isn't a time in my life in the last 40-something years that I haven't had some sort of a chronic health condition which required a lot of sacrifice on the part of my family, whether it was financially or time. I mentioned my wife. It was a good 4 to 5 years where she didn't have a vacation. She didn't take a single day to enjoy, for herself, didn't go anywhere. She spent it with me trying to get me better. I want to thank my parents for being patient and tolerating my eccentricities, my inability to make decisions, my indecisiveness, and especially to my wife for putting up with me and, sacrificing so much of her life for me.
Thanks for spending time with me, Bernie.
Thank you for the opportunity.